Hello.
Hello, welcome to Writing Off the Deep End.
My name is Geoffrey Edwards.
And I'm Mary Thaler. And today we're going to talk about writing about age.
So it could be moving through ages, but it could be talking about the experience of somebody of a particular age.
And I think this is rather important because in many genres, there is a convention of focusing on people in a kind of indeterminate age, let's say like healthy people in their 20s. You know, that character who's just ready to, at the drop of a hat, go off on some adventure, who is likely not romantically attached yet, but may become so in the course of the story. That is a rather narrow slice of the human lifespan that has been chosen. So it's always very special to me when I find a book or a story that is telling me about the experience of being a middle-aged woman, an elderly man, a child.
Yeah, although I have to say that in my own writing, I tend to write life stories.
Okay.
Right? So I tend
within
to
the
move
same
from
story.
the different ages, which is also interesting. But I think it's partly because I'm interested in the process of how we grow and change over time.
Right. So you are consciously, the character at the beginning of it will not be the same as the character
at the end of it.
So what is it about that process that you find so interesting?
Well, one of the things I noticed living is that, the childhood phase and the teen phase are well documented. There's lots of writing about it.
Yeah.
But you get into the 20s and the 30s, and it's not so well documented. And the lessons you learn, you learn individual lessons, and some of them are more general, but there's not so much of a sense of a clearly defined experience in that period. Yeah. Then you get to middle age, and then you have the sort of midlife crisis, and that's well documented. And then again you get into the 60s before you're really elderly, where again the experience isn't well framed in the existing literature. So I like to think about the experience from the point of view of insight and trying to give some insight to some of the things that are going on in those transition periods.
So what do you think is going on in those periods?
Maybe it depends on each individual, and that's where the character comes in. So you develop a character who has very specific issues, and then those are what you develop in that period. But I think it sheds insight about that process, even to focus on individual characters, right? What about yourself? So you write more like a person at a particular age, or?
Yeah, most of my stories tend to be rather bounded in time. They don't cover the whole lifespan of a person. And most of them do fall into that, what we talked about, the kind of default unspecified age, which is usually roughly my own. When I write characters that are outside of my age, I've written about childhood, and I have written about old age. I find old age very interesting because of the accumulation of experience. Like at that point in your life, you have lived through a lot of things. And that gives context to what's happening to you in that moment. So this massive experience is the lens through which you can see the things that are happening to you now. And that can get into some of what we talked about in the previous episode with your non-chronological storytelling, because they're just the accumulation of past that can intrude on the present grows as we grow older. Also, old age is a time of physical vulnerability. I'm always interested in things that highlight the fact that we have bodies, and that we aren't just immortal robots moving through the world, and that things go wrong with our bodies. You don't have to be elderly to have things go wrong with your body. But it is true that as you get older,
more things go wrong with your body.
The limitations become more important. And limitations are an interesting thing to write about and to highlight. On the other end of the spectrum, I love writing child's point of view because, I guess it's the opposite of old age. Things are new. Your characters are encountering things for the first time. There's an openness of possibility in childhood. And there's also physical and social limitations. You're not in charge of your life when you're young. Someone else gets to make decisions for you. And that's interesting.
Although I do feel that young people aren't given as much credit for their ability to think about things as they generally actually have. And so I tend to focus on stories that highlight those kinds of things.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. When I say limitation, I don't think there's a limit on how you can think about and experience the world. In fact, there's fewer limits when you're young because you haven't been beaten into those societal codes quite as thoroughly. But I think that same society tries very hard to impose limits on young people, and encountering those limitations is a part of youth.
Have you written more about one era than the other?
I have often written about them together, because we recently had an episode on family, and I think that a complete picture of the world and a complete picture of family will contain all the ages, from the youngest to the oldest. So often they are coexisting in the same story, and that I find the sort of intergenerational. Generations can be like cultures, and where when we meet at the frontiers, the exchanges happen, sometimes hostile and sometimes beneficial. And so that is an interesting thing to look at in writing as well. Your novel Plenum, it focuses on what I would call adolescence.
This is because it's the first part of a trilogy.
Yeah.
And the second part is middle life, and the last part is older. So
it is going to be old age.
So this is the life story first, but the first book focus on experience as a young person. Right?
Now, when you say you write about the entire life, do they all start in adolescence, or what do you find the most congenial starting place to tell the story?
So that's a good question. In my 15 books, 5 trilogies, most of them start in the adolescence. One of them starts in midlife, just because the person's life didn't have as much relevance to the story that I'm telling until they got to midlife. So it's a different context.
Think many people do experience, I think it is absolutely true that an event coming upon you in midlife can change the course of your story. So it might not be the beginning of your life, but it can be the beginning of a new kind of life in your life.
Pinnacle, another story, actually starts at a younger age than Plenum, around 10, 11, as opposed to 15, 16, right?
Yeah.
So.
And you're writing science fiction. Now, given that the roles of different ages are very much specific to the societies that we live in, part of what you're doing is imagining a future. And so it's not a given that childhood is going to be the same in your universe. Do you know, like, things about how children are educated and so on? You don't have to do it the way that we do it here.
No, in fact, I have a little bit more
Canada.
autonomy in my stories. Although there are issues around socially imposed limitations to what you were talking about earlier. Yeah, I do explore some of those things in the writing. Yeah.
Does that continue throughout the ages?
Yes, but I think writing science fiction in particular allows us to play with alternate life choices and so forth. It's interesting to explore the experience of a young person who grows up in a very different kind of context, right? And the same thing for older people, although I do have elderly, but they're in the stories that I haven't finished as much because they're the last parts of the trilogies. Is it
hard to write an age that you haven't been to?
This is a question I have about you, too. So obviously there's a kind of projection that we do in order to do that. I mean, we do research.
But the research you do to find out what it's like to be elderly, it sounds strange to say that. You don't read books for that. You go and talk to elderly people. I mean, it's not like there's a shortage of them.
Yeah, exactly.
Many of my friends are in that age bracket. The research is to sit and have coffee with them.
Yeah.
And likewise, the research to find out what childhood is to go take a child to the playground and play with them.
Right.
These aren't inaccessible subjects. Though I think it can be more challenging to enter into the world of a child, for me anyway, strangely, because I definitely was a child, whereas I have not yet been an elderly person. But those memories aren't necessarily easy to access. Do you draw on your own experiences of childhood to write childhood?
Yeah, I think so. I think we all do, don't we? We may have a character who has a very different childhood than we actually had, so you have to be careful of not imposing your own personal experience on the experience of a child that has a very different background. So it's a kind of a balance between digging into your own stuff and thinking through the broader lines of the person's life and the way they're living. That's where the imagination comes in more. But,
do you have fairly clear memories of those times of your life? Or?
Yeah, although they're not always easy memories, but
there's emotional work to be done when you mine your own childhood.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I'm not sure if that's the case for everybody, but I think some emotional work is probably needed. This book I'm reading right now, it's called V by Thomas Pynchon. And Pynchon writes something that I found very interesting. He writes that we construct personalities throughout our lives and then reject them. So a person, in a sense, is a multitude of characters, not a single character. I think it's a very interesting way to think about who we are as people, and also how one writes about ourselves, right? So
when you write 3 books about your characters at 3 different ages, you're writing about 3 different characters. In a way. Yeah. That's fascinating.
Yeah. With a continuity or some sort of connection between them, right? Yeah. Okay, well, let's
wrap that up.
Let's wrap that up here. So next time we're going to talk about something. Anyway, we'll see how it goes, because I've written a fair amount about war and...
Yeah, in those far future societies, some of them are in conflict.
Yeah, but I was thinking also about the historical context of the Second World War. So we might talk a little bit about war and some of its ramifications without necessarily doing it completely, because it's such a large topic.
Yeah. So don't forget to subscribe to get more episodes. And...
we'll see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
Bye-bye.